Situated in the heart of the Swiss Alps in the valley of the River Inn, Museum Susch is more than just an exhibition space. It is a research facility, a cultural laboratory, and an archive where European heritage has merged with revolutionary ideas. Housed within a meticulously restored ensemble of buildings that once served as a rural monastery, the museum embodies a geological sense of time, lending gravity and depth to every project it undertakes.
The current exhibition, Profusion, is dedicated to the remarkably prolific Croatian artist Edita Schubert. Born in 1947, she was active from the early 1970s until her untimely death in 2001. She exhibited at the Venice and Sydney Biennales and throughout the former Yugoslavia, yet her work remains little known outside her home country. Seen together here for the first time, her practice reveals a deeply coherent vision beneath its striking diversity.
She was an artist who was extremely busy and prolific, and you can walk from room to room, which covers different periods in her career, and feel at first, as if you're meeting different artists. These shifts in her practice are so pronounced. She's extraordinarily brave. She was trained as a painter, so she has great facility in terms of image making, and she produces these kind of hyper-realist paintings, quite mundane objects, but she blows them up to a metre large, so these very mundane objects suddenly become kind of monumental in some ways. It was never exhibited during her lifetime, and so it's a treat to be able to show this work. Her first solo exhibition was of a kind of motif that she became intensely attached to, which is the architectural form of the cupola. The dome suggests something like the heavens, but of course, religion is asking us to think beyond the material world, so they're transcendental, they're cosmic in that sense. As a joke, she said, I'm going to take these cupolas and I'm going to subject them to bureaucratic processing. And she started to make file cards where she organised them in files and systems. And this is really what that generation of artists in the 70s had also done. They'd produced a kind of bureaucratic conceptual art. They were interested in documents. They were interested in repetitions. So she's using all of that, but for this cosmic form. That's not what her generation did. Yugoslavia in the 1970s. It's not the easiest environment to be an artist in, so she had a double life. She was earning her income from being an illustrator in Zagreb in the Institute of Anatomy. It's both a pragmatic, practical thing, but it also has an impact on her work. There are dissections being done there regularly. The materials, like the plaster, this is coming from her other life, her professional life, but it's being imported into her practice. What's the point of a door that you can't pass through? I spent a lot of time trying to think, trying to make sense of those doors. She published a catalogue at the time. No text. Maybe you're in a hallway or a waiting room, but you can't pass through any of these doors. So you're presented with something that feels like a choice or perhaps a confusion, but you can't pass through these doors. You have to do this sort of imaginative projection. And I came to see lots of thresholds in her work, spaces that perhaps you can pass across, or in this case you can't. So your threshold here is one about the imagination, not about the body. Almost overnight, by the end of the 70s, she moves into a very different language where she works with natural materials and produces something that seems kind of strangely ritualistic, even kind of primitive in some ways. She took the red petals of 100 roses and the green leaves of 100 roses, and she took the stalks and formed two beautiful small circles. These were the petals and the leaves that she picked 40, almost 50 years ago. So there's a really direct human connection that's coming partly through nature, but partly through that gesture, that activity. And that's an amazing connection across time. In 1982, she was selected for the Venice Biennale and the Sydney Biennale, and she produces these very large format works. She takes large canvas panels and she covers them with bitumen. It's very dark, it's very black, it's tar-like, used in roofing and so on. So this was a big shift in her practice. There's a really striking work simply called Face. And when you look at it, you can't quite see a face. Perhaps as you work at it, maybe you do see that face. Maybe you see it winking back at you. And that for me is often what this work seems to do. It kind of invites you in and invites a kind of speculation. I think this imagery often has a kind of anxious quality. It's a little bit unnerving. Yugoslavia in the 1980s is starting its decline. It's not yet in war, but we see the beginning of nationalist tensions. The economy is starting to crumble. You know, this is work that really speaks to what it is to be a human in an age of considerable anxiety. She has this very pronounced successful moment. She's showing internationally. She's making very large, ambitious work. And within 5, 6, 7 years, Yugoslavia falls apart. The country is consumed by civil war, a series of wars. She takes images from the press. She combines them as collages, and then she overlays, using acrylic paint, this key-like pattern, this repetitious pattern across the surface of the work. So you can see the image, but not fully. That parts of it are obscure and parts of it are seen. So the figure of the human as geometry against violence points to something really dark that's happening in the world in close proximity to her. So in the late 90s, Schubert starts to produce work which I think is much more explicitly autobiographical. So she makes a series of self-portraits at different ages. So she's there as a 16-year-old girl, but she's there as a woman at the age of about 50. And then around it, there's a complete horizon of barcodes. And what's very interesting and odd, and I think in some ways quite difficult to explain, but it's important, was that she would always photograph, then photocopy, make a Xerox of the photograph, and then destroy the photograph. She's not letting us see the original photograph. And I always feel that there's something about her work where she's holding back. She wants us to work hard to try and make sense. After that point, I think she discovers that she's ill, that she has cancer, and then it becomes intensely autobiographical, and also is a kind of reflection of her health. So, in the biography piece, the final set of test tubes are called Phony Smile, and this is clearly about this challenge of having to face up to living with this extremely difficult diagnosis, having to smile but losing your hair. So we've put this series of works, which is biographical, alongside something that she calls Horizon. It's a series of rings which are suspended in the air, with photographs that she'd taken probably over her life, over the previous 30 years. And these are places that she felt a personal connection to. So there's the city of Zagreb, but there's Paris, and there's Venice. These are not perfect panoramas, but they're like memory. Memory is fragmented, memory breaks. And there's something extraordinarily touching that we think about this artist who at this stage knows that she's at the end of her life, producing a work which she publicly exhibits And here we've effectively recreated that experience to invite you into her life. Here's an artist that in some ways had fallen out of history, very successful in her own career, but not in the history books. And like now, when we see all of this work together, there's a kind of injustice there. She ought to be in these history books, and maybe this exhibition is a contribution to that. I never met Edita Schubert, and in fact, I was really introduced to her art by a really brilliant art historian called Leonida Kovač. Leonida was close friends with Edita and made a kind of promise, a promise that she would look after the work and she would bring it to new audiences. And I think by helping us bring it to Susch, she's met that promise.